This week we received some really sad news that Mr. Alexander Dumble has passed away. I had the honor and privilege of meeting Alexander and getting to know him a little bit over the past few years. So I wanted to make a video just to talk a little about my experience hanging with him at his house. I was out there maybe 5 or 6 times. Yeah, we just spoke on the phone a few months ago, so it's very, very sad that he's no longer with us. For those of you who aren't familiar with Mr. Dumble, he created Dumble amplifiers, and they changed the way guitarists think about tone, I would say. You know, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Santana, Robin Ford, and Larry Carlton. He would custom make the amps based on the way the player sounded and kind of tweak it to the individual player's voice. I feel like there's not a lot of characters like that around anymore. I had the honor of meeting Les Paul when I was a teenager, and he really reminded me of Alexander in that, you know, they were both just crazy passionate about music and sound. And I didn't spend much time with Les, but the short time I spent with him backstage, all we wanted to talk about was Django Reinhardt and Django's guitar. I was a 17-year-old kid at the time, and yeah, it was just really, really special to hang with him. As it was just amazing to hang with Alexander. So I first met Alexander in 2016. Robin Ford connected us. I was on tour with Robin quite a bit in 2016 with the Guitar Army, which was a group featuring Robin, Leroy Parnell, and myself. We played quite a few shows in 2016, and Robin had his Overdrive special out on the road. And I played through it at soundcheck here and there and just was blown away by the way that amp sounded. And so Robin offered to connect me with Alexander to see if Alexander might be able to make me an amp. And so he connected us via email, and Alexander replied right away and said, "Lovely to connect with you, Joe. Can you mail me a CD of your music so I can take a listen and hear the sounds you're getting and make a recommendation from there?" So I mailed him a disc. I actually mailed him an acoustic CD and then, you know, a compilation of different electric songs I've recorded. He emailed back and said, "Joe, I just love these CDs. Your playing is so great." He said everyone that stopped by the house that's heard it has just been floored by your playing. He especially loved the acoustic album I made. Yeah, we just had this really nice exchange, and he invited me to his house to play through some different amps. So I went out there. I remember, you know, I had a rental car. At the time, it was like a Dodge Charger. It was kind of like a muscle car. And I pulled up at his house, and I wasn't sure I was at the right place. So I stepped out and was getting ready to phone him to double check I was where I was supposed to be. And I heard him playing, you know, from inside the house. I could hear it from outside the house. I guess it was pretty loud. And it was unmistakable that the man who made those amps was playing the guitar. He just had a beautiful way of playing. He was just a gorgeous player. And so I walked up to the front door and I stood there for 30 seconds or so and just listened. And I was like, man, this is Alexander Dumble I'm listening to. That's so cool. And so I rang the doorbell, and he came out, and he was just so kind and really soft-spoken, intelligent, fun guy to hang with. You know, I'd spend a couple hours at his place each time I'd visit, and I'd play through all kinds of amps. I'd play through little tweed amps he'd worked on and blackface amps like super reverbs, and then I'd played through his own custom amps, and he had some crazy amp that was one of the first ones he built that had this wild distortion. Yeah, I mean, we just talked about sound and guitar playing, and he was really interested in the way I played fingerstyle, and he asked me to send him one of my songbooks. And so I sent him one, and the next time I visited him, he said, "Yeah, I've been trying to play a few of your songs," and he was just really, really cool. One time I visited him, I walked in the door, and he said, "Hey Joe, I've been listening to this female singer, and I'm just blown away with the sound of her voice, the tone and the overtones in her voice, the way it resonates." And he held up a CD cover or a LP cover, I forget. And he said, "Have you ever heard of her?" And it was Adele. And this is in 2017, so she was really famous at the time. The amplifier conversations for me kind of went, originally we were talking about him modding like a Fender basement head, like a blackface basement head. And then we talked about tweed amps for a while. and he was working on Tweed amps quite a bit at that time, and so I played through his little champs and deluxes. He had a really cool idea of sending him a Tweed Deluxe head reissue and having him mod that, which I really regret not making that happen. I just never followed through with it, and I really regret that. But you know, I remember I was there one time, and I'm playing in his living room, and I mean I played acoustic through his overdrive special, and he said, "Oh, I got this I think it was a super reverb in the back room, and I've just been working on. I want you to play through that." And so he went out there and he said, "You know, just play for a few minutes. I'll be right back." And he was out there for about 10 minutes, and I'm just plugging through all these different amps, hanging out, and he brought this super reverb out, and I played through it, and it sounded amazing. I mean, when I played, he really paid attention. He just was listening to the sound and asking me questions about what I was playing, and yeah, just a really, really cool person. I mean, you couldn't imagine a nicer fella. This is the last email I received from him. "Hey Joe, glad to hear from you, and thank you for the good news that you're staying healthy, especially since you were in China when the pandemic miasma started up." That's a whole other story. I was in China December of 2019. "It is so fortunate that you did not contract the COVID-19. Is Tommy Emmanuel healthy and free of the virus? Please say hi to him for me, and that I wish him well." He really, loved the way Tommy plays, and he'd email me and say, "Hey, Tommy's playing at this theater or that theater. I'm going to go out and try to see him." I had an interesting connection with Mr. Dumble through Bakersfield as well, because I went out and played at a place called Trout's, which is a famous old Bakersfield haunt. And it was a night for Mosrite guitars, and all the Mosrite people were there. And Alexander's first job, I think, out of high school was working at Mosrite, and he built amps for the Ventures and all that. So he's kind of part of that history. And so I met a lot of those Bakersfield music people that have been there for years, and Alexander was friends with them, and somehow they got talking about me. And I remember I played at the Crystal Palace in Bakersfield, 10 years after I was first at Trout's, and I walked into this music store next to the hotel I was staying at, and he said, "Hey Joe, I remember when you were at Trout's. That was such a great night." And they all remembered. I guess I made an impression. I played there with my friend Brian Brown, who was a couple years younger than me. I was probably 17, 18, and Brian was 15, 16. Anyway, interesting connection with Alexander through Bakersfield, and when I was in Santa Cruz, I'd always send Alexander pictures of the Rio Theater, which is where I played at there, and he'd tell me stories about when he had his shop in Santa Cruz, and anyway, here at the old Rancho, which is what he called his house, have managed to stay clear of the pandemic infectious pathogens. Just made a new batch of chicken broth spiced with bay leaf, herb, and pepper. We had interesting conversations about chicken broth because I'm really into making bone broth, and I told him about this powdered bone broth, and he said he bought some at Sprouts. He said it's really convenient because when I was on the road, I'd have bone broth with turmeric, this drink, and it was a good source of protein and good for the gut. I had food poisoning one time early when I was emailing Alexander, and he said, "Hey, do you ever eat kimchi and sauerkraut and yogurt and kefir and different things to help with the probiotics of the gut?" And one time I told him I was coming to visit, and he asked me if I needed directions because of accounting for traffic or whatever. I remember he said, "The 405 is a gauntlet for sure, and people jest with some umbrage along that route." He had a really interesting vocabulary. And I told him that I used Waze. And then he emailed me back, a few weeks later and said, "Hey Joe, I was driving around with Larry Thomas, who was the former CEO of Fender, and he said, we used your app Waze and tried it out, and it works great. So thanks for that recommendation." So thank you for the concern, and let's look forward to a glorious resolve to the coronavirus woes. The world needs to get the shows back on the road. He said that in all caps. By the way, have you been able to get in a lot of recording time? Many players are emailing, writing that new tunes and recording projects have all kept the creative processes alive and well. Please stay well and virus-free, and keep me posted on events there in Nashville. Cheers, Alexander. So, I just wanted to make this video to talk a little about my experience meeting him. I can't really even put into words the way the amplifiers sounded, and I do sincerely regret not having him work on an amplifier for me. I think the amp that we kind of last settled on was a Tweed Deluxe mod, and he turned me on to Fender Champs, which is, I mostly use a little blackface champ in the studio here. I also carried on the road, I have a Pelican case, and it goes in the Pelican with my pedals and whatnot, and I'll take it out on solo shows and dates with Tommy Emmanuel, and I'll be playing these big concert halls with Tommy with this little champ. And it sounds great when you put a mic on it and crank it through the PA. Anyway, Alexander was just a really special person. I think the world needs more people like him who just care, or who take such pride in what they do. And we live in a world of mass-produced everything, and he was a guy that had a house just filled with capacitors and tubes, speakers, chassis. And he was just always working on his craft, which was building these incredible amplifiers, the greatest amplifiers in the world. There's a lot of stories about him being kind of standoffish to certain people, and I think that he was the kind of fella that if he liked you, he really liked you, and if he felt like you had an ulterior motive, or he just didn't respect your music, or I don't know, I don't want to read into it too much. I kind of really sympathize with the guy because his amps just fetched such a huge price. He wasn't interested in mass producing them. There's a lot of people that would try to take advantage of that. I heard all kinds of stories about people who'd sell his amps and he wouldn't talk to them again. I had nothing but wonderful times hanging with him, and felt nothing but respect and kindness from him, and I'm really grateful for that experience, and I'm grateful that Robin introduced me to the man. So I just wanted to make this video to talk a little bit about Alexander, and I'm going to be thinking about him, and just really grateful that I had the chance to hang with the man.